So today we're talking about visual elements, the things that we do to make it pretty. And that will sort of speak for itself. We're going to figure out how to create lines and borders on web pages, decide when to use graphics and what graphics are appropriate. I'll apply the image element to add graphics to web pages, and we're going to look at that from two ways. There's when you use web pages or images as background, and when you use images as part of the content, because they perform differently depending upon how you put them in there. So we're going to look at hyperlinks as well, and one of the things that you're going to need to do is either to create or find images for your website that go along with whatever storage. So there's places out there where you can get royalty-free images, and so we'll take a quick look at that. The first element we're going to look at is the horizontal rule. This is the easiest element to do anything with because it is a visual element. It's one of the very few elements that is in itself a visual element. The horizontal rule, and if you look at the picture that we have here, you see the line going across the page underneath the text. That is a horizontal rule. What it does is it creates visual separation between different sections of a page. The next thing that we have is the border property, and that is whenever you have got a box, whether it be a inline or a block element, the border is the color and patterns that you can put around the edge of it. So that you've got three different ways of adjusting it. You've got the width, the style, and the color. And I'll show you some of that as we go on. In the example that's in the picture, there you've got a heading, which happens to be a H2 in this case, with a 2-pixel solid border that is red. So those are the three different elements that you can affect in it. Now with block elements are those things that it's not, well, the opposite or the alternative to block are inline. So like if you were selecting the center portion of a sentence, that would be inline, whereas a block would be the paragraph, and so the paragraph itself forms a block element. So it is square, and the only shape that it can be is square. And they extend from border to border. And the only way that you can reduce that is by giving it properties that say that it's smaller than whatever is the available width. So we've got the block elements that extend to whatever size they can, and then we've got inline, which the border is closer to the element itself. And the example here shows an anchor tag is not a block element, it's inline, so it's much smaller. This is going to let me, yeah, it's not going to let me move my mouse. Oh, there we go. So the block elements go all the way across the page, and the inline elements are limited by a little bit larger than whatever content you're looking at that minute. Now, this is one of the first time, or maybe the second or third time, that I'm going to bring this point up. You don't always have control as a designer over the way the information is going to appear. You can apply rules, but because of the way that some browsers interpret things differently, you don't always have control. For instance, here are some of the different border styles that you can have. And over on the left-hand side, you see how Firefox would present it. And on the right side, you would see how Internet Explorer does it. For instance, if you go to the second row down, you've got the inset and the outset. And in Firefox, that gives it a three-dimensional appearance where the border is either inset or outset. Whereas in Internet Explorer, all it does is give you a standard border. So there's still some limit because of the way that these things have been implemented in different browsers that you're going to run into little things like this as long as you go. So that's one of the good reasons why when you actually get to designing, you'll want to look at your website with different browsers because you may find that it performs very differently depending upon what you've done. There we go. Okay, with a border, you've got the ability to set it to, you can control each of the 4 sides of a border independently, top, bottom, left, and right. You can set them to all the same, or you can control each one independently, and later on when you get into actually doing this, there's shortcuts that allow you to sort of quickly do it if you want different borders different ways. But frankly, with Dreamweaver, it's easier to use the interface to set the borders differently than it is to use the shortcuts that have been developed. Okay, the padding is an element, again, visual. You've got your border in there, and then when you add padding, what you're looking at is between that border and the text, the space that comes between the border and the text is the padding. That's always on the inside of the box. Margin is on the outside, and you can't really configure margin to have color. All that's saying is the next element can't bump up into it. Same thing with padding. All you can really do is say, I want there to be a certain level of separation between this element and whatever sits inside of its borders. And again, you can control that top, bottom, left, and right with the margins or the borders. Margins on the outside of the box, border or padding is on the inside of the box. We already touched base on this. You can control the padding differently depending upon where it is. For instance, in this case, you see just a small gap between the right border or the left border and the letter H, but above and below it, there's more. So the left border is 5 pixels. The top and bottom are 10 pixels. So you've got that ability to create that spacing even between the different elements and how they are interacting with the content within them.
So if you would have just put the padding left, then the other ones have stayed at 0?
Okay, the question is, if I put the padding to just left and hadn't done the other ones, would the other ones stay at 0? And I'm going to escape from this, and I'm going to go to Dreamweaver, and I'm going to show you how you would affect that. By default, if you don't tell it to do anything, then it defaults to 0. But there's in Dreamweaver you have the ability to set all of them the same. So you just have to sort of watch until you get more familiar. But the default in Dreamweaver is to set them all the same, and you have to actually tell them to do otherwise. Now I have set up a document called Visual Elements, where I've put some of this stuff into play. And which one did I do padding on? This one, I think. So in this case, I have created a div called Box Model. You can see it highlighted there, and I've added a number of different properties there. So if I go to Box Model, you can see, like I said, there's all kinds of properties there. And if I go into my pencil, which is my preferred tool to use, and I go to Border, now you'll see that the default is same for all. And actually, I should have gone to Box. To illustrate the point, if this tick box is checked, same for all, like it is in the case of margins, then they're all going to be set the same. So whatever you set 1 at, they're all going to be set to that. But I've taken, in this case, I've taken that tick mark out, and that allows me to set different ones, 5, 10, 15, 20, for my padding in that case. Now if I went in put that tick mark in, it's going to change them all to whatever the top one is, and it's not going to default back. So I would have to go in and change that. But you've got the flexibility to do that. If you don't code anything, the default is 0. If you are using the Dreamweaver coding, the default is to have them all set the same unless you tell it to do it otherwise. I wonder if I can undo that. Yeah. Okay, moving back into the presentation. So that's how you would deal with the padding. The same thing with the border, which is same thing but on the outsides. So, or not the border. The margins are on the same side, outside of the box. They've got the same kind of controls that you have. So that's sort of the ways that you can affect the boxes that we work with. Another element that we have to work with, other than just the boxes that we build, are actual graphics that are from other programs. There's 3 formats that are universally acceptable on the web. You've got the GIF, the JPG, and the PNG. Sometimes the JPG is also called the JPEG. GIF is it's actually a type of image that's going away because it's being replaced by PNG. It's best used when you have graphics that you design that aren't going to have a lot of colors, whereas a JPEG is better used for photographs because of the way that it handles. It's got access to more images. GIFs are limited to 256 colors. JPEGs have millions. And then the newest format is PNG, and this is the default for programs like Photoshop, Fireworks, some of those. And what it does is it takes the advantage of both the GIF and the JPEG formats, where it uses compression and allows you to do different things. So these are the 3 types of graphics. So when you start to design your websites, you can do a lot with color just by manipulating the boxes, but when you're wanting to bring in more graphically intense types of things other than just patterns and background colors, then you're going to need to start bringing in images that are created either in cameras or in other programs. So just quickly about GIF. One of the things about GIF is it can have a single color that is transparent, so that you can design a graphic and you can set it up so that the browser sees through the edges. So that's one of the ways that you can get out of an image looking like a square. So you can put a background or a transparent color on a GIF that's the same color as the background on your page, and that allows that graphic to sort of escape from the boxy shape of the website. And you can see in this example, this section over here has no transparency, so you can't see through it. In this side, it's configured to be transparent. Again, a maximum of 256 colors. Only one can be transparent. You can do animations with them, but you don't see that as much as you used to. It uses a lossless compression, which means that if you have a really complicated image, it can get large. So normally it's for pretty basic images. And it can be interlaced, which just simply means that as it's loading the image, instead of loading from top to bottom, it sort of loads every other row of pixels so that it forms up quicker, so that you can see sort of the content before the whole thing loads up. Works a lot like the way that television monitors used to work, where they lay every other line of the image out there. Here's our JPEG. Again, best used for photographs, up to 16.7 million colors. If you need more than that, I can't help you. It uses a lossy compression, though. When you start compressing this down, it loses a lot of the information, so that, and once it's lost, you can't get it back. So that's the biggest problem with JPEGs. And every time you save a JPEG, even if you don't change it, if you're moving it from your hard drive to your thumb drive to a different hard drive, Every time you save that, it loses a little bit of the quality. And so that's one of the problems with JPEGs. You can't make it transparent. You can't animate it. And it's similar to interlace in the form that it's progressive. And we don't need to understand the full technicality of how that works. PNG is the one that's emerging to take the place, definitely of GIFs, but also a lot of things that would have been in JPEGs before are moving to this. It supports millions of colors, multiple levels of transparency, but the browsers don't support multiple levels of transparency. So for now, you shouldn't use more than one level of transparency in this. Because when you bring it to the web, something that you thought was transparent isn't going to be, and so you'll lose part of your imagery. Supports interlacing, and it uses lossless compression, so that as it's reduced and then made larger, it's not as prone to pixelization as you go about manipulating it. Okay, so when we're doing HTML or XHTML, what we're using is, in order to put images in there, we use the IMG element, as you can see here. Now, the IMG element has a couple of different attributes. You've got the source, which points to the file. You've got the alternate attribute, which you should get in the habit of always using an alternate attribute. And what the alternate does is it explains briefly what's in the picture. We've talked about designing for accessibility. This is one of those things that you need to do to make sure that everybody's able to see your content, or at least know what the content in there is. You can also affect the height and the width. And when you're doing that, you can actually set them differently, and it'll stretch your image or scrunch your image if that is your desire. Now, with the image element, there's different types of alignment. And I'll excuse me, I'll show you this when we go back to Dreamweaver in a little while. We've got the ability to align top. And what you're doing is you're actually giving this property to the image. But what you're doing is you're affecting the way that it interacts with the content around it. Okay? So if you're setting the alignment to top, then you're telling it that whatever words are there need to go, the first row needs to go to the top of that image. The default is to the bottom. You can also align it middle. Now, if I had this same text on this side, what it would do is it would do the first line of that text up here, and then it would drop the rest of it below that image. So if you want your text or other content, I don't guess it always has to be text, to sort of wrap around and flow around it, then you need to set the alignment to either left or right. And what that does is it places the image to the right in the top case of the content, and it places it to the left on the other side in the case of the lowercase one. And the nice thing about it is that it allows the text to wrap around underneath the image as it goes on. Okay. We've got the ability, there's what's called vertical space, which is the space above and below an image. And we've got the horizontal space, which is the space to the left and the right. Those are, again, attributes that you give to the image to control how closely things get to it. Just like we use the padding and the margins in the boxes, we can use H space and V space in order to control how close the other elements are getting to our images. And even the note in here, CSS, this is actually going away. It may take years before it goes away, but it's moving towards using the CSS padding property, which does the same thing but with more control. Okay, we've already talked about the alternate tag. That's the one that you give to let people know the basic content. If you've got a lot of content in your image and it's critical for people to know what that content is, even if they can't see the image, they've got what's called a long description attribute, which actually allows them to click on that image and it'll bring them to another web page that contains a whole lot of information about what was in the image. It's not used very often. The other thing that we can do is turn an image into a hyperlink being the ability to click on it and go to another page. Anytime you see buttons in navigation, that's what they've done. They've taken an image up there, put it in there, and they've created hyperlinks out of it. So you can give that attribute to an image, but not to a background image. Okay, in this case, we've got two different background images, and the natural state for background images to have is that they're going to tile both vertically and horizontally. Tiling means it will continue that same image over and over again. So this is actually the image that is in here, and it tiles and comes down and goes down repeatedly so that it gives it the idea that it's one solid image. Same thing, in this case it is a textured background image that allows you to see that texturing because it continues to tile. Now, just like most everything else, you've got the ability to control the tiling. You can repeat the Y, which here is that image there. Repeating Y would send it down this way. If you had repeat X turned on, it would take that same image and it would run it across this way, doing it so that it was sort of a bunch of little squares. You can do repeat X to create an image across that way. The advantage of that is that it uses less space because it's only loading the file once to create the whole textured pattern. And the same thing, you can use images, not just colors, to repeat Y, repeat X. And this is what they would look like if they don't have a repeat. Now, when it comes to choosing names, what you really should do is think about, okay, in 3 years when I need to edit this site, how am I going to know what an individual image is? You might end up with hundreds or thousands of images in a website, and so it's best to use a descriptive term and not one that gets crazy long. So short descriptive images are the best way to label it so that you know what images are without having to go in and look at them. All lowercase letters. Don't use punctuation symbols or spaces. You guys have heard that from me before. Bless you. You can't change the file extensions either. Whatever it is given, it needs to stay at that because that's how the browsers know what kind of file it is and how to interpret it. And then the next thing is organizing your site. In this class, I will require you to keep your images in a separate folder called Images because I want you to get in the habit of managing your websites like this. And so that's really what this comes down to is where do I find an image? If it's always in an Images folder, you're going to know where to find it so that you can go to edit it or replace it later on. And the next thing, we've got thumbnail images, which is a small version. Actually, I've got some slides for this. Thumbnail images, favorites, image maps, sources for graphics, etc. So this is a thumbnail image, and a lot of the people in here in this class end up using these, where they want a small picture, but they want to be able to click to it to go to a larger version. So what you do is you create a thumbnail, which is a smaller version of the same image, and you can create a hyperlink so that they can go and see the large image in the browser. Then there's this thing that favicon, when you go to a website and you see that up in the where you put the URL, there's a little image that's associated with that website. That's because they've created this small square image called a favicon, put it on their website, and they've linked to it with the type of image /X icon. And those are normally called favicon, and that will load into RSS feeders in the web browsers so that they can see what it is. Image maps allow you to define certain portions of a picture to have a hyperlink that is unique from other ones, so that you can create different sections of the same image will go, when clicked, will go to different locations. This used to be a real common way that people would design navigation. It's sort of fallen out of favor for various reasons. But it is a possibility that's in there. And the way that you do it is you actually give it coordinates about, you have to designate within the shape you want a rectangle, here's the coordinates, and then it creates a rectangle in there. You can also do circles. I think those are the only two shapes you can do. Now, obviously, you can create your graphics, Photoshop, Fireworks, Casa. You can download them from free sites. For instance, Flickr is a website where people will share their images, and what they'll do is they will put up a different type of license on that image that says, yes, you can use this however you want. Yes, you can use it if you give me credit for it. Yes, you can use it as long as you're not making money off of it. No, you can't use it at all. So there's sites like Flickr that might be really useful to allow you to get access to graphics without having to pay for them when you get to the point where you're doing your projects. The main thing from this graphic is the screen resolution. All web displays at 70 dots per inch. So you need to use images that are 70 dots per inch, DPI, when you are putting them on the web. And this image is all about being wise in how you manage your graphics so that they display without having to use a great deal of bandwidth. So what you don't want to do is take an image that's this big, a huge image, and just tell it to display at the smaller size, because it still has to download the full image, even though it's displaying at the smaller size. So what you do is you make a copy of that image that is the size that you need, and that's what you use to download. We've talked about accessibility. Anytime you're trying to download or trying to design, colors that are applied in CSS are going to be a more efficient way of downloading than downloading images, because all it's got to do is download the code with 6 bits of information for a hexadecimal image, whereas if you had a background image that was 800 by 600, then it's going to have to download that whole image to accomplish the same thing. And that's just a summary of the things that we have talked about today. What I want to do is I want to bring you into Dreamweaver and just quickly give you a view about how you would use this tool to interact with your website. Bear with me just a second. Okay, so we've got a couple different elements here. The first one we talked about is the horizontal rule. If I want to put a horizontal rule in here, the easiest way to do it is to come to this insert element. First I put my cursor where I want the horizontal rule, and in this case it's just a matter of click on horizontal rule and it puts it in there. Now when we get to block level borders, I like to use divs anytime I'm doing this, and you'll learn later on why it's good to use divs, because they give you additional control. So in this case, I've created a div. The div, and I come down to my context-specific navigation here, is called Visual Border. And I come over to my CSS here, and here's the different properties that I've applied. Okay. It was blue because I had selected it. So I've got the green border. When I click inside of there and select it, it looks like it turns blue, but that's just the selecting. So I come over here again, open this. You'll see that I've got the color. I've got it set the same for all. Just like we were talking about with the paddings and all that, I can change one border. So I'll go from green to blue on that side because green and blue go so well together. And then again, I've got the ability to change the style and the width independently. So I'm going to set this as dotted, and I'll put that as dashed. Leave the bottom one solid, and the left I'll do a groove. And then I'll change my widths just so that you can see the way that we can manipulate this stuff. So I'm choosing 15 pixels on that one. So now when I apply that and go back to it, I wish I could zoom. I can zoom in there. And what you'll see, whoops, if I'll hold still, the top one is dotted, the bottom one is solid. I think the left was groove and the right was maybe dotted. I don't remember exactly what I did. But you can see by that top green box with the blue borders on the edges that I have the ability to control each of these edges of whatever element I'm working on independently. I can apply that, for instance, to H2s by using the style sheet. I can set my H2, and the properties that I give it are the same for all in the size, and what I've given it is a double style. So you see a double line in that case. So rather than going and showing you each and every one of these, this web page is up on my site for you to take a look at. Here's an example of an inline one that only does the center of the page. You'll notice the rest of these are going out to the edge of the page. And then this is just a sample of the box model. The box model is something that we're going to use a great deal in this class. And the box model is just the way that rules are applied anytime you've got a box in your website. And let me get you a page number to look at that is the best way to visualize how that box works. So if you want to look now or later at page 217 or 218 in your text, it's got an image that shows you all the different properties of the box. You've got the content, the padding, the border, and the margin, and how they relate to the border that's in there. And I don't have an image there, but essentially here's the content. The padding is that section between the content and the edge. The border are the edges, and you can colorize those. The margins are the spaces outside of the border. Now, in this case, I put a second div around it just so that you could visually see the margins. You cannot colorize your margins. The way that these appear to be colorized is that I actually set a box around it and set it so that you could visualize that element of the box. And I didn't get my image synchronized when I was doing this. Okay, so in this case, if I had updated the images, you would see this image here. It's interacting with the content here. And the way that we do that what I've done is I've right-clicked on that image, and you can choose to align, and we were talking about this, right. It's left aligned right now. If I change that to right, notice how it switches which side the image is on. Again, I'm going to do a control. Oh, there's the align. So I can do the top, which will put the first line of text at the top, and then the remaining ones will go down to the bottom. Middle, again, one line goes to the middle and the rest is at the bottom. Bottom puts the first line at the bottom, and then the one that you see more often is the left or the right. All right. Any questions about that? There's a lot to it. Most of it that's in the book. The best way to learn this will be through doing it, and you will be doing it a lot through the semester. So that's the flexibility that we have to bring to the websites. We're working with squares. We can manipulate the colors, the spaces around them. We can add images, and there's this whole interaction of the different visual elements that are in there. Okay, any questions whatsoever? All right, that is all I'm going to talk about today.